As a former teacher, he is committed to education and has held numerous community informational events. Glad I have this. The topics include coyotes, my personal favorite, local law 97, fire safety, redistricting, public safety, ranked choice voting, and public safety. And tonight, we have the fiscal year 2024 budget. During tonight's forum, which is the first of its kind in this district, Councilmember Dinowitz will discuss the budget process and timeline, specific highlights from the budget, discretionary funding, and helpful resources. And then comes the fun part. That will be when I present your questions, which I've compiled here, to Councilmember Dinowitz. Now, I have these questions because you may have already submitted them through the Google function, or you might have given us a question when you walked in. But if you think of a question while Eric's presenting, you can submit that question. We have some volunteers here. Maybe they can stand up and raise their hands. We have Ben Jackson, a community activist, who's also going to be collecting your questions tonight. We have, let's see, Carolina. Carolina, where are you?
She's out.
Oh, she's out. Okay. Joshua, Crystal Diaz, Julio, and I think I pointed out Joshua. He's in the back right there. So again, just raise your hand if you have a question. Someone will come over with a slip of paper and they will wait for you to fill it out and they'll bring it up to me. So with that, I know that I'm excited. We have, I think, $30 million brought into the district for this fiscal year alone. And I'm excited to learn about where it's going, and I'm sure you all are as well. So with that, let me introduce Councilmember Eric Dinowitz.
Yes, very good. Very good, man.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Virginia. And thanks, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate you coming and being part of, engaging in this process. The budget's like a little wonky sometimes, so that so many people are here is really a testament to how engaged all of you are in the community. And I do also want to thank Matt and the Riverdale Y for hosting this event. The Riverdale Y is really a special place. This stage, I think I first stepped on it in 1996 when I did Bye Bye Birdie. I was Randolph McAfee, if anyone knows what that means, but I was this big. And then since then, I know my dad is here almost every day. I sent my kids to the pre-K program here. I'm visiting the senior center all the time. It just really is a place for our entire community to come together, no matter what your age. And I just want to, again, thank the Y for hosting us tonight. As Virginia mentioned, these sorts of forums are really important to me. As you know, I was a teacher for 14 years. And that comes out of thank you, Neil. That comes out of a love of education. And through that, I started community activism. And I see a number of people from our community board, former chair Laura Spalter, vice chair Bob Bender, Marty Walpoff, and I think I saw David Gelman riding on his bike. So we have and of course in the back, Scott Crominger, the treasurer. We have a lot of people who are engaged in the community, and of course our assemblyman Jeff Dinowitz is hiding in the back, but I can't hide that much. And as Virginia said, we've done a number of educational pieces throughout the district, and this is just another one on the long lines of that. I do mobile office hours. I am around the district. The libraries have been an incredible partner. I see our local librarian here. They've been an incredible partner for space throughout the district. So whether I'm in my office, whether it's at our libraries, whether it's at community board meetings, events, I really try to make an effort to get out in the community and really hear from all of you, because that's what informs the work that I do here in the district and the work that I do at City Hall. And tonight we get to discuss the budget. Coyotes. That was a real one. So in today's presentation, just to go over kind of the set of things that are going to happen, I'll explain a little bit the process, and then we'll go over major highlights from the adopted budget. We'll go over some highlights locally of funding that we got for the district. We're going to display helpful resources, ways you could be more engaged in the budget, and then we'll have time for your Q&A. And I just want to say one more time, if at any point you have a question, you wrote a question, you have a second question, just raise your hand. Crystal Diaz, Julio Gutierrez, Joshua Falk, or Ben Jackson will come over and take your question or hand you a slip of paper to write your question. And then Virginia and I will have a little conversation about all of the questions that we've received, both through the Google form and from all of you tonight. Hey, that's me. Okay. And so the budget process, to put it really simply, well, first, the fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th. That is our fiscal year. So it becomes a little confusing sometimes because we are now in FY 24, even though it's 2023. But we're in fiscal year 24. But to sum it up, this process is really a back and forth between the mayor and the city council. And it starts in January officially when he presents his preliminary budget. We have a round of hearings. The city council has what's called the preliminary budget response. We have more hearings. And then we shake on an agreement, and then we vote on an adopted budget. The budget is passed, and hopefully a lot of great things happen for us. But before any of that happens, I mentioned earlier, I like to get around the community. I like to hear from everyone. And there are two, I think, main ways we do that regarding the budget. Besides the anecdotal stuff that I hear from all of you during our community meetings, one is our local community board. They have a process by which they pass what are called budget priorities. And they have an expense priority and capital priority. You'll hear these words a lot. Expense are like day-to-day items, those are things funding staff. And capital, think of capital as technology or buildings, things that have a long lifespan. And they present those priorities. And here's the even more confusing part. I think it's this October, they're going to vote on their FY 25 priorities. They already start on the priorities they want for next year's budget, so we can get them in time when we vote on next year's budget. But something we also do in this district is we do our own survey. And we try to get out in the community. We sit in front of schools and libraries and community centers and hand people out a QR code or a website, and they fill out the website and they say what their priorities are. And so for this year, you can see that from the feedback we got, environment, schools, youth, and parks were some of the biggest items, the biggest priorities our district has. And you'll see later in our capital budget that that's reflected in our capital budget. So here are some of the things people said in this feedback form. They spoke about the parks and playgrounds needing upgrades. True. They said better quality schools help our youth. True. People in urban areas need parks. True. Youth development, food security, environmental justice. Parks under budgeted. True. This person at the end really called Van Cortlandt Park what it is. It's a gem. It is the best park in New York City. Third largest, first best. And so I take the community board's feedback, and I take your feedback, and I take everything you tell me, and we have our preliminary budgets. But what's really important that we all had to grapple with this year was that it started out in a very challenging place. The mayor proposed cuts of 3% to the DOE and to CUNY across the board, and 4% to every other city agency. Now, what the administration said, bless you, what the administration said was that these were efficiencies, that he instructed agencies to find these through efficiencies and vacancy reductions. Now, those are problematic for a couple of reasons, but one example is this. Let's say we budgeted last year for 100 DOB inspectors. And the mayor might say, well, we only hired 60, so we can cut that budget by a significant amount because we didn't hire that many people. Except the reason they didn't hire that many people was because the agencies didn't do the hiring, or OMB didn't approve the hiring. So there really is this back and forth and this really nuanced conversation about, all right, how much really is efficiency and how much really is you should have hired the people in the first place? And that becomes part of the conversation in our budget hearings. And the second thing, I know we watch CNN a lot, watch MSNBC, Fox News. The federal government spends money because they can borrow money. They can pass a legislative item with appropriations attached if they want, because they can borrow money. In the city, we cannot borrow money. We have to have a balanced budget. The budget must be balanced. So a lot of the conversations we have about what are our revenue projections and what is the actual revenue that comes in, and we keep updating the budget throughout the year. But for example, the mayor proposed a $102 billion budget. And he also wants to be conservative in the estimations. One, because it has to be balanced. But later in the year, if we find out we have more money, that's good. But if we find out later in the year that we have less money, we have to do mid-year cuts, which is bad across the board. So we debate what the projections are. We have debates about what the revenue is going to be. And so the mayor started out with a $102.7 billion preliminary budget. And we ended up with a $107 billion adopted budget. What we agreed upon in June 30th, was a $107 billion budget. So we have our budget hearings, March and April. We look at the mayor's budget, we ask tough questions, and there are some really important things that could come out of these hearings. So there are local issues I bring up. One issue is the Clinton pool, which I'll get to in a sec. I'll come back to that. But the other issue, we have citywide problems. We have citywide problems with the funding of our schools, and that's an administrative decision. We have problems with our 3K program. So we have our response, and in our response, we highlighted a few things: investing in our city's workforce and safeguarding the delivery of essential services. And then May and June, we have another round of hearings where we bring up items again. I'm going to get to the initial budget and extended 3K later, but I want you to put a pin in that. But I do want to show you one of the great things that can come out of these hearings. Well, I'll tell you one small thing. You can look at the picture. But one small thing is that at a DOT hearing, I had to bring up at a budget hearing that they couldn't paint lines on our street for parking spaces. And lo and behold, I bring it up at the hearing. The next day I get a call. And then later that week, the lines were painted. But sometimes bigger things happen. This was the Clinton pool. And this is a pool that has been unusable for years and years and years. This is a problem for the kids at that school. I went to Bronx Science, and my classmates, I wasn't on the swim team. I'm not that good, but my friends were. And they would go to they would go to Clinton and swim in the pool there. And now they can't. But there are deeper problems. You know, we talk about children not learning how to swim. We talk about a lifeguard shortage, but here in one building, we had the opportunity to teach kids to swim, to provide for a sports team, and to make sure we are possibly training new lifeguards. These are programs that exist within the Parks Department. So we had that before, and through the hearings and through collaboration with the SCA, School Construction Authority, we were able to push them to upgrade the pool. And now it's filled, it's totally usable, and you can see they even painted it a nice color. And now starting in September, these kids, our children, our neighbors are going to be able to use this pool. And the next step is trying to keep the pool open over the summer so that, like they do in other parts of the city, because why shouldn't we have that here in the Bronx too? So we adopted the budget in a vote of 39-12, indicating a supermajority, overwhelming support for this budget. It passed. And what we were able to accomplish was restoring a lot of those things that the mayor originally wanted to cut, and invest in the future of our city. I was also able to secure a lot of wins for our community. So one thing we did was we did ensure the delivery of essential services. Many of you heard that they were going to cut the libraries by $36.2 million. And again, through these hearings, we revealed that this would have resulted in weekend closures and in some cases whole branches closing. And we fought very hard to restore all $36.2 million to the proposed cuts, so we won't be having any branch closures, no weekend closures. We restored $22 million for twice-a-day litter pickup. I hear from you all the time how important it is to have a clean neighborhood. Council members across the city are hearing the same thing. And so we fought for that, and that was a big win for us. And we all love the zoo, we all love Wave Hill, Botanical Garden, and all of those other things like the Central Park Zoo, I guess, and the Prospect Park Zoo, and I guess things in other boroughs matter too, but Bronx. And so we restored $40 million for the zoos, which aren't only great places to go and take your family, but they provide internships for our youth and do a lot of incredible community programming. We distributed a few months ago, I think 200 tickets to the Bronx Botanical Garden to see the orchid show. And I know some people here were able to take advantage of that. That was going to be cut in the proposed budget. And then $2 million, not enough, but $2 million restored for tree stump removal. We also supported older adults. Now, this was also a very tough one because the Department for the Aging was cut. It was cut. But we did restore $7 million for older adult meals. And I know every time I come to any of the centers in the district, that's what people are doing. They come to enjoy their friends and have a nice meal together. And so one of the big things we got was 4.5 million baseline, which means we shouldn't be renegotiating that every year. It's part of the budget. And a big one we got for our service providers was actually an increase to the reimbursement rate of $1 per meal from $11.78 to $12.78. And I know $1 doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're talking about thousands and thousands of meals, those are numbers of home delivered meals. Those are numbers that really add up for our centers that are providing the services to so many of you here. And then 5.6 million for our groceries to go program, which helps a number of people secure those groceries at a lower cost and helps out a lot of New Yorkers. When I was elected to the city council, I ran, and something I kept saying was, let's keep people in their homes. We talk, they want to build a shelter here, and the things I say to DSS and the things I say publicly is we should be focusing on keeping people in their homes rather than waiting until they get to a shelter and finding great shelter space for them. It's not humane, and it's not fiscally responsible either. And the first bill that I signed on to was the expansion of the right to counsel. And the right to counsel is legislation that says if you make a certain income, you have the right to an attorney to help you with your eviction proceeding. And what we did this year, we increased that funding to $46 million to do two things. One, to hire more lawyers to pay them, because they need money too, and to increase the rate at which they are paid. So 46 million, I think it was an increase of 20 million to keep people in their homes. We had $300 million for programs like City FEPs, housing attendant assistant programs, and then $4 billion in capital funding, which I know we'll get to the capital process later. But for HPD and NYCHA, we accelerated some of that money. $175 million was accelerated to this year's capital plan to accelerate the restoration and building of new affordable housing. Oh, put your cell phones on vibrate if you have that function. We invested in our communities. $95 million for a fair expansion. This was a program initiated by the council. I know many people here get the senior reduced rate Metro cards. You don't have to raise your hand. I know. And there are a lot of New Yorkers who aren't old enough to receive that benefit, but really need the support in affording the bus and the train. And so we invested $95 million to make sure that people who want to or need to take the train or bus to work, to pick up their kids from school, to visit mom and dad, go to their doctor's appointment, could do so affordably. We added $11 million to cover the cost of MetroCards for summer youth employment program participants. That's our youth. Those are our teenagers who are trying to work in our city and have summer jobs. And then 22.5 million for the Work, Learn, Grow program, another thing to support our youth. I think that's ages 19 to 24, so like older youth, but still youth, still youth. And education. I told you I'd get back to it. Education is very important. I know we're going to talk more about the education portion during our Q&A. But in our adopted budget, we allocated $31.5 billion to education, to the Department of Education, which is a $500 million increase from what we adopted last year. And early childhood education. One of the things that came out during the hearings and during the preliminary budget, the administrator wanted to cut by, I think, tens of thousands of seats, the number of seats that they paid for 3K program. And their argument was essentially, well, we allocated for this many, but only this many students or this many families took advantage of the program. And there were a couple of things we said. One was like, they're not advertising enough. This is a free 3K, is an incredible program and beneficial to so many families. But we said, one, you're not advertising enough. So they committed to that. But one of the things we did was we were able to say, all right, maybe, perhaps, a 9 to 2 o'clock or 9 to 2 o'clock program for parents isn't really what working parents need. So we piloted a program to convert 1,000 of those seats to extended day per year 3K programs. To say, what does it look like if we extend the day and allow working families to actually engage and actually utilize this 3K program? And so that was baseline. Adult literacy, 6.7 million. And in response to our hearings, one other thing we got in the hearings, we got the administration to commit to, was that initial school budgets were not reduced. One of the issues we had last year was that a lot of the schools said, they were getting cut. They eventually got the money back, but by the time they were able to make the decisions of who to access and how to access, they realized maybe they didn't need to access because they got more kids, but they couldn't make those decisions because for many of them, their initial budgets were so much smaller. So they said, okay, we're not going to cut the initial budget. You'll have the money you'll need, first day, second day, first month. You'll know a little better how many kids you'll have. Then we'll do the mid-year adjustments. And that should be a better method of doing things. So that was something we got. And the second thing, which was in part the hearings, but also part of a years-long struggle, was to change the fair student funding formula. I have a lot of issues with the fair student funding formula, which if you want me to geek out on education budget, I will, but I won't bore you with that. But through this process, we were able to push the administration to budget for a new category for fair student funding. What fair student funding is, each student gets a certain amount of money attached to them, and then they get a little more if they're English as a new language learner, if they have an IEP. And the new category, which is adding money to many schools' budgets, is students in temporary housing. Which is, look, if you're a student and you're in temporary housing, you probably have a few more needs than other students living in more permanent housing. So let's attach a little more money to that student so perhaps the school can hire another counselor or another social worker. And so those were things that throughout this process, the hearings and then the budget hearings, we were able to help push for. CUNY, huge. CUNY is huge. They wanted to gut CUNY. I chair the Higher Education Committee. And so I'm a graduate of CUNY. My dad is a graduate of CUNY. And if I'm lucky enough and my wallet is lucky enough, my kids will be graduates of CUNY or SUNY. We restored $32.4 million of the proposed initial cuts to CUNY, and that includes really important restorations like ACE, $9.1 million for ACE, and $5 million for the ASAP program. And these are programs, I like to just call them college. It's providing, with a lower ratio, students with an advisor, saying if you need, here's a MetroCard, helping them pay for their textbooks and really giving them a lot more support so they can take classes that fit their schedule if and makes more sense to their lives, just get the support that they need. And what we see in programs like this is an increase of 50%, a graduation rate increase of 50% within 2 and 3 years. And then guess what? These graduates go on to make a lot of money for themselves and for the tax base. And programs like these have return on investments of $2 to $3 per dollar put in. So my argument throughout the hearings was this is morally the right thing to give our students the support they need. And it's fiscally responsible to invest in our students because they're bringing that money right back to the city. Again, and there was more money. Oh, there it is, $5.9 million for additional academic advisors. And the CUNY Reconnect program, $5.8 million. That was a program that said there are a lot of people in New York City who have some college credit, and they just never finished their degree, and they need someone to reach out to them, to affirmatively reach out to them, bring them in and provide them with the support they need, because at this point, a lot of them have jobs already. Maybe they're taking care of kids or parents, and we see 16,000 more students registered through the CUNY Reconnect program last year, and I think last year we allocated $4.6 million. So this year was an increase of about $1 million to that program, which again is the right thing to do, to reach out to our New Yorkers and say, there's a place for you at CUNY, come. And by the way, it's bringing in those tuition dollars. So it's also fiscally responsible to invest in programs like these. So those are some of the highlights for the budget. There's another piece of the budget, overall budget, that we're going to go through. It's a little wonky, but this is definitely a wonky crowd. I can tell. First is called units of appropriation. And so if you imagine, the $31.5 billion for the education budget is a pot of money, but we break it up into pieces called units of appropriation. And what this does, this allows us in the council and the public to see in what areas the money is being spent. So that's personal services, other than personal services. Some of them were regarding transportation. So we've got a number of new ones this year which provide us more oversight. So the Department of Corrections, transportation, personal and other than personal services, NYPD, DYCD, criminal justice, HRA, all of these things provide you and the council the ability, again, to break each agency up into smaller pieces so we have a little more transparency. And then if they need to move dollars between, let's say, personal services and other than personal services, like, I don't know, NYPD decides they need to buy 10,000 more robot dogs, they probably, you heard about the, thanks, Merritt, they probably need to transfer money into the other than personal the technology. So a little more oversight for us. And then one other little wonky thing is called terms and conditions. These are sort of, it's reporting. It's mostly reporting that's done in these. So we say, when you pass the budget, these are the terms and conditions, and I actually have them printed out right there if you're a nerd like me and you want to read all of them. But there are things last year we passed, for example, as a term and condition of passing the budget, the administration has to report on sick time for Department of Corrections officers. They have to report on charter school rent. They have to report on bias incidents at CUNY, which was a big important one for me and a lot of people in our community and throughout the city. So bias incidents, charter school rent, spending on asylum seekers is one we added, emergency contracting, Department of Education payments to early childhood providers, and restorative justice programming. Because we don't break the DOE budget up into little tiny pieces, but we did want to report on how much you're spending on restorative justice. That's critically important to me as a teacher and to so many of us in the council. In years past, we passed things like reporting on air conditioning at senior centers, I think, which are now called older adult centers. Anyway, so that's all right. So that's the citywide budget. That is citywide, some of the highlights. I know there'll be questions. And as a reminder, Crystal, Julio, Emily Hausman, Ben Jackson, and Josh Falk, if you have questions about anything you heard, raise your hand, and they'll come over with a piece of paper and a pen, can write it on down. Oh, thank you for sharing. Sharing is caring, and I know this community shares. The other part of the budget is called discretionary funding. And this is money that, in response to the needs that you share with me, and that you share with me, I allocate for my office. So that's a boring definition. But it's also important to note that the discretionary funding was on the chopping block. And you'll see how critical those funds are by some of the highlights. Because earlier this year, the mayor proposed cutting council members' discretionary funding in half. And brought in over $2 million through discretionary funding. And so, for example, $83,800 to the Riverdale Y for things like their senior program and other critical community work they do. Is it $110,000 to the neighborhood house, $70,000 to Riverdale Senior Services, $95,000 to Mosaic Mental Health, $105,000 Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, $340,000 for after-school programs, $10,000 for the Kingsbridge Historical. And I want to pause on that slide though, because I want you to imagine what it would have meant if these discretionary items were cut. $70,000. I was just talking with my friend yesterday about it. He's teaching poetry. Some of the classes are online. And I said, we give some of that money, at least part of it, is through what we call a digital inclusion grant. Now, older adults can take classes in poetry and a number of other things online. They get the support with Zoom because in part of that digital inclusion grant, which is part of the $70,000 to Riverdale Senior Services. $105,000 to the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. We're talking about cleaning up the park. We're talking educational programs for our children. Now imagine all of that being cut in half. And that was, again, some of the things that I'll call it part of the discussion with the mayor. And the $18,200, you may have seen Family Fun Day, disco, skate party, movie nights. That's what we allocate for those community activities. That's me. And I'll give her a shout out, Crystal. We're cleaning up the pond at Van Cortlandt Park. And I will say as an aside, this morning I testified at the Public Design Commission, testified at so many of these meetings, about the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook. But we're helping fund cleanup program was there, but I'm also putting on those gross suits and wading into there to clean the water chestnuts. $120,000 we allocate to ACE. And the picture will pop up, but this is one of my favorite allocations. A lot of you call my office regarding cleanup services. They say it's dirty here, it's dirty there. And we, again, negotiate for more funding for sanitation, but ACE is a nonprofit where they go wherever we want. We do the routes on Riverdale Avenue, on Johnson Avenue. And I think what's so important about this program isn't just keeping our neighborhood neater. This is an organization that employs people who are formerly incarcerated and homeless, living with homelessness or formerly homeless, and really providing that opportunity along with social workers and other supports. And so, we're doing something with our funding that I think really needs to be done more in our city, is helping people, get back on their feet and supporting them, and also keeping our neighborhoods and our quality of life where it is and improving it. You may have noticed planters on Riverdale Avenue. That's from $10,000 to the Horticulture Society. You may not have, but go out to Riverdale Avenue. They're quite beautiful. We had $20,000 to KRBC, $25,000 to Jewish Board of Family Services, $15,000 to support a cleaner Van Cortlandt Park. And this is the footbridge. This is one of our part of the crews working to keep that neat. And no doubt there are other issues with the footbridge. But keeping it neat is, and sweeping garbage off it is one of the things that I'm very proud we fund significantly to keep our neighborhood neat. And then in addition to that, there's something called initiatives. Initiatives are called citywide initiatives. So there's something called the Geriatric Mental Health Initiatives. There's the Elie Wiesel Holocaust Survivor Initiative. There's funding the Hate Crimes Initiative. There's all these fundings citywide for citywide problems, and they're then allocated to different organizations throughout the city. And we have fought very hard to preserve or increase funding to some of our local organizations that we know do critical work. 110,000 for Hebrew Home for the aged, 50,000 for Riverdale Y was one of the new ones to help combat hate crimes. And they've done incredible programming with teens, bringing teens from different parts of the Bronx together. Over $181,000 for Mosaic from citywide initiatives, an additional $377,000 for RSS, 50 for Wave Hill. I mean, the numbers go on, because we in the Northwest Bronx can really address a lot of the citywide issues. So that's what we're able to get for our community. And that's Wave Hill. It was quick, but if you know Wave Hill, that was it. And lastly is capital funding. So each council member, we get $5 million in discretionary funding. That's where it's much easier for us to say, I want to put $1 million here, $1 million there, do that 3 more times the amount of money. And so what I like to do over the years, I like to make sure every single school gets something. And over the years, we've gotten, we've given tens of thousands of dollars to schools for technology. That's a big one they can use right away. This year, I worked very closely with my colleagues with the Speaker's Office, with Borough President Vanessa Gibson, and even one of my colleagues, Carmen De La Rosa, from District 10 in Manhattan. And I will tell you why in a second. But reflective of the community's desires, we gave a lot of capital funding to parks and a significant amount to schools, and then a few other things here and there, like public buildings, health and hospitals got some money. But we're going to go over a few of those highlights right now. So we were able to get, and this is a big one, I think, for me. Not just for me, I mean for our community, but I am very proud of this because this was done in huge collaboration. Councilmember De La Rosa, and Borough President Gibson each allocated $1 million to the JFK sports facility, the football field. And then I worked with the Speaker's Office to get an extra $2 million for their baseball field. And you just talk to the students, you talk to the coach, and they say they go around the city. They see what all other parts of the city get. They have these nice, beautiful facilities with lighting and a beautiful scoreboard. And now our local high school is going to have that same quality football field. A brand new turf, stands, lighting, scoreboard, all of it. 150 technology upgrades at PS7, 100,000 for library upgrades. That's in addition to the 150 we got them last year for the library. 100K for Intech, we got them $1 million 2 years ago for their track. 175 for 95, $500,000 for building upgrades at Riverdale Neighborhood House. 246 for Hebrew Home. And again, some of these are done in conjunction with especially the borough president. And so if you look at this picture here, we visited, that's Councilmember De La Rosa. That's my good friend, Coach Vega. And that's me wearing a suit on a football field, which wasn't a smart choice. Someone asked me to catch. I was like, no. I'll wear jeans next time, or shorts, or what are you wearing on football? Cleats. Cleats is it? Okay. But like these, this is like one of the letters from JFK, from Knights maybe. It lifts up. And the coach was telling me that students were getting injured, like rolling their ankles, tripping on their own field. And the way he describes it, he says, Eric, he's very close with his students. He also articulated, he go around the city, play the games. He sees what the other communities get that we don't get. So first of all, now we got it. And secondly, he says to me, he's like, I've coached a lot of kids over the years. He's like, I was one of those kids. I know exactly what they'd be doing if they didn't have football. And the way he says the best crime prevention program for my students is football. And so when he said that to me, it was just a no-brainer. Work with my colleagues, get $5 million from the Kennedy Field, and this is already being worked on. And you can see they already tore it up, and they're rolling things out, rolling it out. And so you can already see this isn't a, what's it called? A picture, a made-up one. This isn't Photoshop. Rendering. Thank you, Jenna. This is the field. This is it. They've started, they're still doing work, but like it's beautiful. The drainage was bad, kids were tripping and falling. This is it. And there's a new score. I already mentioned, I'm just so excited about this. There's, like I said, almost 30 million in capital funding. It goes to lots of different places, but I'm just really proud of how the city council colleagues, my friends, the borough president, we work together and collaborate for the good of the community. And if you're wondering why Councilmember De La Rosa was interested in investing money as well, because JFK sits in Marble Hill. And Marble Hill, it's the mainland, but it's like it's Manhattan, which is weird. And so I know, again, if there are questions, raise your hand. We have a ton of questions. I'm a little nervous, actually. But looking ahead to FY25, again, the community board, I don't know if there's a date yet, but you can harass David Gelman over there. He's the budget chair. They are having their FY25 hearings. I think they had them already, but their budget hearings probably October. You can still scan that QR code. We can send this out to you if you left your email address with us to give us feedback. It is rolling. I am always listening. And then the council has incredible resources. If you say, I wonder what PS24 got. I wonder what PS81 got. You can search it on the council website. Everything, most things are there. So those are two websites. You can go to search, my contact information. And of course, I would now like to bring Virginia Croppinger back up for some question and answer. And Eric, how do we do on that microphone?
Should be good.
Oh, really? Okay. We started a little late because we were having technical difficulties, and Virginia and I would have had to pass this mic back and forth, which is a little weird. But it looks like we have a microphone, so it's over there. So you all know Matt Abrams-Gerber. He does everything at the Y. Give him a round of applause. And welcome back, Virginia.
Okay.
Oh, cool. I thought this was my leaning post. I was starting to get a little relaxed. It works. And Eric Berger in the back, former Riverdale Rising Star. Do you know what that is? Oh boy. Incredible theater program here at the Y, on the stage. And I can also say again, I mentioned 1996, but 2000 through 2005, I also did like the teen shows here. Yeah, it was weird. My voice was higher. Okay, so welcome back, Virginia.
All right. Well, before we get started, I just want to point out that you still have the old Twitter logo on your slide, and I'm just wondering if we're going to need to make other updates to this.
No. First, I refuse to go with the X. It's like a protest. And second, I think if we didn't know Elon Musk before, we know he just like changes his mind every second. So I'm fully confident he'll go back to the bird, and he'll make it like upside down or something and say it's a political statement. I don't know, but I'm leaving it there because it's. Come on.
All right. Let's get started. I just want to say that
I also do want to say, what do you call it? Xing? I'm gonna X.com? No, it's a tweet. So I've had a lot of feelings about this.
I'm so glad I asked. Okay, so I know that I'm excited to talk about this. I like talking about how our dollars are being spent, how our money's being spent by the city. Why did you think, since this is kind of a new concept, we haven't done this in our district, why did you think it was important to have this conversation?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, education has always been important to me, not just my career, but I think even back in middle school, I was doing the peer tutoring. And I just, as residents of the Bronx, it's important to me that we have, people who know where their tax dollars are going, and people who know what's going on with the coyotes, and know about redistricting, and know about fire safety and public safety. And some of these things are a little technical, like the budget, and some things are straightforward, like stop, drop, and roll. But either way, it's been so great to see such a great turnout at so many of our events, virtually and in person. And again, watching tonight on Bronxnet, there are people at home watching on Bronxnet, learning a little something about the west side of the 11th Council District. I should mention, I didn't mention this before, I did a budget forum a week and a half ago at Mosholu Montefiore Community Center, where a lot of the discretionary focus was more focused on the east part of the district. So you may work in or know Norwood, Wakefield, Woodlawn, and Bedford Park, and you say, well, why didn't he mention anything there? It's because I mentioned it a week and a half ago, and I was more focused on, I think, looking around. Most of you live in the Riverdale, Kingsbridge area, so we focused a lot of those details on Riverdale.
Great. Okay, so I've consolidated the questions because there are several duplicates. So if you don't hear exactly your question, I hope we get to the content of what you were asking. So with that, let's start with participatory budgeting. Why didn't you do that this year?
Okay, so participatory budgeting, first of all, is where residents literally vote on where $1 million of their capital budget, of the $5 million I mentioned, the $5 million discretionary, $1 million is voted on by people in the district. We looked at this the first year that I was in office, and there was a few things we looked at. But the main thing I think for me was the survey data. In addition to getting votes from people over the years, when Councilmember Cohen did it, they take survey data. And what the survey data showed me was the majority of people who vote in this participatory budgeting were wealthy and white. And anyone could vote, right? Wealthy white people, everyone has a voice. But that's not really representative of our entire district. Our entire district is not really people making over $125,000 a year. And so I felt, part of my job as a representative, and this was also something that came up a lot during the campaign, was ensuring that every neighborhood is represented. And so that's when we first did the survey and went out into the community and did the survey. And I said, I can better represent the entire community without being restricted by participatory budgeting, which skews to one demographic and one economic class. So didn't really help reflect the needs of the district.
Thank you. And following on that then, did you consider this a progressive budget? Were there things that, you wanted but didn't quite get in there? Were there things that you were happy about?
Yeah, so I mentioned a lot of things I'm happy about, and I can sit here and talk about all the things I'm not happy about, and which is it's a ton. But we negotiated this budget not just with the mayor, but with 50 other members of the council. I certainly would have liked to see more money go to CUNY, and not just CUNY in general, specific programs. And so I mentioned ACE and ASAP, these incredible programs, and for the first time this year, in part because of my advocacy and because of the advocacy of people throughout the city, we actually named those programs. In previous years, it hadn't necessarily gone specifically to those programs. But we said this year, no, we are going to allocate specific money to this initiative, ACE and ASAP. And I know we're going to see a ton of return on investment. I certainly would have liked to see more money go to housing and keeping people in their homes. But again, we're negotiating with the mayor, who has a lot of power in this budget, and also with administering the funds, and with a lot of Republicans, we'll just say a lot of very far-right Republicans, and Democratic Socialists. So all of that together, I would say that given where we started with those 4% across the board cuts, 50% cuts to discretionary, and all the other people in the room, I'd say that this was a pretty good budget. Yeah.
Great. And, just thinking about the negotiations and what that takes and all the different parties and all the different priorities, what does happen, if anything, if you don't pass the budget on time?
I think the biggest concern of the finance staff, we have a great staff, the finance staff, they go and they crunch all these numbers. They come back to us with different options of what we can do with the money we have. And one of their biggest concerns was our bond rating. You know, if we don't, I think the federal government is facing this too. They faced it about, was it 13 years ago? A lower bond rating means it's going to cost more to borrow money. And when we borrow, all the capital is through bonds and essentially borrowing money. And I think one of their biggest concerns with that was that costing more money, because a good chunk of our budget goes to debt service. And we don't want to see that number increase. We want to make the smart capital investments. We need to invest in our schools, in the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook, for example, for the Clinton Pool, JFK, for all of these, for everything that we love for our parks, and really be smart about our bond rating.
Okay, great. All right, let's move on and let's go into the specific topics
Sure.
that people care about. Seniors, we have a lot of questions about that, and let's just get right into this one because a lot of questions relate to this.
Okay.
So can you talk about what's happening with the city retirees health plan?
Oh God, it's terrible.
Okay.
It's terrible. So
Yes.
essentially, I guess the short of it is that the union, the MLC, the Municipal Labor Committee, and the mayor agreed to a deal where to find savings that the union's committed to. The union's committed to these healthcare savings. The only way they seem to be able to find the savings is by moving retirees to a Medicare Advantage plan, which I think is outrageous. And I think for years, since we had our first hearing on this in October of 2021. And even then, I was in civil service and labor, I still am. And another great resource, by the way, sign up, you could find the video of this online. You know, they just say these wild things. You know, they were saying, oh, it's a better plan and it saves us money. Well, regarding the better plan part, I like to give people a fair shot. I've been saying, come to the community and tell my community members how great this plan is. But what I said to them was, and I think I used these words, I said, it sounds like magic. It sounds like magic that you have a better plan and you're saving money. And why didn't you do this earlier if it's so incredible? And there wasn't really a good answer. I mean, some of the answers I've heard is we were trying to avoid it. I'm like, well, why were you trying to avoid it if it's so great? So we had it then, and it's just been a mess. It's a saga, and the retirees, I think rightfully so, have sued the city, and recently they won the court case, which is I think just incredible, because it's hard to understate the power of the courts in a situation like this. I mean, what the court says is law. There's no question about it, and the courts can move the mayor and the MLC to provide this funding. Now I know there was a question about how much money is allocated for the healthcare funding or something, but here's a little secret. In this budget, we didn't, I'll put it in finance terms, we didn't recognize, in quotation marks, recognize the savings of moving retirees to Medicare Advantage. So that 600 million, and then I think it goes up to $1 billion in savings later for the city, but that money is in this city budget. So the money's there. The court case was an incredible win. The retirees cannot be moved to the Medicare Advantage Medicare Advantage plan. The city, my view is the city got to kick in the money. I mean, these are our retirees, and I know exactly what the retirees were told when they started working, because I was told the same thing. It's like, yeah, you're going to make less money, but you're going to get a pension, and you're going to get retiree health care, and here it is. That was the promise we were made. And one other thing I bring up at the hearings is, how do we expect young people to come work for a city when the promises that are made can't necessarily be kept? I mean, it's the reason we fought so hard against having a constitutional convention in the state, because we didn't want to amend the part of the Constitution that protected our pension. So in short, the money right now was allocated in the budget. We didn't recognize, see the quotation marks, recognize the savings. The court case is an extreme win for our retirees. And I just know and support all of the appeals. The city is going to appeal, continue to support the retirees on their appeal, which I think and hope that they win.
Now, we have a lot of support from the crowd for what you just said. Do you think that pursuing, well, waiting to see how it plays out in the courts? We had a big win on Friday.
Yeah.
There may be an appeal by the city, of course. We know that there is proposed legislation, local law 1099. First of all, I don't know if everyone knows what 1099 is. Do you want to talk about that?
So 1099, so I think that here's a bit of a wonky part, I think. A few months ago, we had a hearing on an administrative code change. And I think the message back then was, don't change the administrative code. You can't change the administrative code because that's the thing protecting our healthcare. But now we are being asked to change the administrative code. I know there are different messages being shared about this. I think the court case is the absolute clear-cut win for the retirees and the way forward. And I think just two examples of why the courts are unequivocally empowered to do things and sort of force the city's hand in a very good way. I think we all know what's going on with the asylum seeker crisis. I think morally we have a responsibility to house everyone. That's my feelings, to take everyone in. But we also have a legal responsibility. And people often talk about the right to shelter law. But it's not a law that the city council passed. It is a judge's decision. A court ruled that New York City has to house everyone. Accessibility was also something that's critically important to me. Before I was a member of the city council, I think I mentioned I was a teacher. I was a special education teacher, and I worked with students with disabilities. And then I joined the community board, and I was chair of the committee on aging for older adults. And as Democratic district leader, I created a coalition on the Mosholu Parkway Forest train station, and it was a coalition of tenant leaders, of businesses, of the hospitals, of residents. We got 2,000 signatures. We testified to the MTA, and they committed to building accessible, and to make that an accessible station, to build an elevator there, which is right near 2 hospitals, a business district, one of the largest Mitchell-Lama developments, 2 schools. I mean, it's a no-brainer, but we had to do that community activism and get that forward. But the courts also later ruled, well, no, the city's actually required by law to make these upgrades by a certain year. And so now, or maybe it's the state, but those upgrades are now required at certain train stops because the courts ruled it. So when we ask about what has the strength and the power, I am looking straight at the courts as our hope for making sure that we get accessibility, we house people, but also right now that the retirees get the health care they were promised.
We have another strong reaction from the crowd. Considering that this is such a large part of the budget, is there another way to attack the problem? What about costs?
So, underlying all of these, thanks for asking that, and thank you to whomever asked that. Underlying all of these things are healthcare costs. And so, I would just say the fact that Medicare Advantage exists at the federal level is ridiculous. Privatizing Medicare. I mean, this is an option because the federal government for years has promoted this Medicare Advantage, which is not Medicare. But so that the federal program exists is ridiculous. I think obviously the federal government needs to step in. We had the Affordable Care Act. That slowed growth, but not enough. I believe we do need universal health care, public option Medicare at the bare minimum. New York State has the New York Health Act, which I've supported. It's universal health care. That's right. Universal health care in New York State. And I know it's passed through the Assembly a number of times, passed through the Codes Committee, in fact, the great committee with a great chair. It has not yet passed through the state Senate. The state Senate, I think even through committee, has failed to pass the New York Health Act. But that aside, right, because that's federal and state, those are two bills or initiatives I think should be prioritized. We in the city council actually passed a bill. It's a healthcare transparency bill. It sets up a board to look for healthcare costs in our city, healthcare savings in our city, but also is supposed to require hospitals to be transparent with their costs. Because you get home and you're like, why did it cost $900 for an aspirin? What is that? And $45,000 for, I don't know, a bedpan? I don't know. And so the transparency is also shown in studies supposed to help lower costs as well. So we are working in the city council to actually fundamentally address the issue of costs.
And I think that's so important because our last question on the topic someone asked is, and it's a fair question, but if the retirees are successful, what will be the impact on the city budget?
So it isn't just the city budget, it is the agreement that the mayor and the unions have with one another, because the city has been sort of picking up certain costs the unions agreed to pay for. I mean, that was their collective bargain, that was their agreement. But again, that 600 million is not it's accounted for in the budget, right? We didn't pretend that the retirees were moving to Medicare Advantage. So I believe that the court's force, I believe that a negotiation, something has to be worked out between the unions, between the mayor, and between the retirees. That is the way forward. They got to sit down and work this out because there's a lot of money at stake, but more importantly, there's a lot of people's health care at stake, health care that they were promised.
Great, yes, that is true. Just staying on the topic of seniors.
This is the best one. Okay.
I know, and you did cover a lot of this in your presentation. But how are you going to protect seniors from continual budget cuts? And, how are you going to move forward things like, accessibility at the subway stations?
Right, so the accessibility in the subway station, I mentioned we have court cases and there's capital projects. In fact, that Mosholu Parkway, the 4-stop, is in design. I don't know if they started construction, but I'm so excited that they're starting construction very, very soon. One of the great ways I think to support accessibility in our public transit system is by supporting our buses and bus service. I think the last time they wanted to cut express bus service, which is the only fully accessible way to get downtown, because buses are accessible, was in 2019, where our local elected officials held a forum about this issue. They did not cut service to the express bus, but also then we had COVID. So I think that kind of put everything on pause. But fighting for our bus service and to make sure we have the buses. I mean, it's one of the reasons we invest in programs like fair fares. Look, there are people who jump the turnstile, who do the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. And then there are other people who, they feel like they could sneak on. It's $2.90 is a lot of money to spend on a bus, and they just kind of sneak on. But our system's losing money. And so fair fares is one of those components we have to make sure our buses get invested in. But it's also for pushing things like, when we have bus lanes, pushing things like automated enforcement with the cameras to make sure no one's blocking the bus lane, to make sure our buses run smoothly so people can accessibly get downtown. Again, buses, I'm a huge fan of buses here in the Bronx. They're the way we get across, do a lot of our travel. They are the only fully accessible way to travel.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to a new topic, asylum seekers. I am actually just going to read this question to you.
Should I be nervous?
Maybe.
Okay.
Okay, so if no help comes from the government, I assume the writer means federal and state government. Mm-hmm. Will the reported $12 billion cost to the city over the next 4 years for the immigration crisis? Can you envision layoffs and cuts to services in the future for New York City? If not, where will money come from? And then another person asked, people are concerned about draconian cuts that may be coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
So I too am concerned about those cuts. I want to say as a preface, to make sure everyone knows my position on this, is that, again, we have a moral and legal obligation to house people. And I would never, ever, you'll never hear me saying, well, there's too many people in our country, turn people away at the border. Because every generation of people in this audience, of New Yorkers, have had their people turned away. And if you haven't had your people turned away, then have some empathy. So we house everyone. With governors from Texas and Arizona using human trafficking, they're human trafficking people for political pawns. So if we don't grapple with this issue, it's going to be very costly. I'm not sure if $12 billion is correct. It seems it's a little high because a lot of those services are services that we give anyway, but it's going to be in the billions, that's for sure. The governor has stepped in a little bit. There was, I think, $1 billion allocated, a quarter of which was released recently. But the assemblyman, and maybe about a dozen other local elected officials from the Bronx sat down with the governor on Friday. We sat down with her Friday, and among other topics, we said we need more support and more money from the state. But really, what we need is federal money. Because remember, we have to have a balanced budget. We can't borrow money, we can't print money, we can't invent money, but the federal government can. So they not only need to help fund a crisis that they are helping perpetuate by not having immigration reform, but there are also concrete steps that can be taken. And I think one of the most straightforward ones we're asking for is work permit authorization. And I signed on to a number of letters urging the administration to have emergency work permit authorization. Because people, they want to work. And what the governor said is, there are farms upstate where they can really use the workers, and we have asylum seekers here who want to do the work. And so those are two steps. But if we get nothing from the federal government, if we have no immigration reform, if we have no funding from the federal government, if we have no work permit authorization, if we have no space in other parts of the state, because the right to shelter law only exists in New York City for a weird reason, we're going to be facing some serious problems in our budget, and I am concerned about it. Yes.
Yes.
Did I get to all the things? Because there was a lot of things.
You got to all the asylum seeker things, but it brings us to our next topic nicely, which is housing. People are concerned about housing, whether it's for asylum seekers or for people who are here already. Mm-hmm. Are there provisions in this year's budget for sheltered housing for our elderly or mentally ill population? And will there be social workers on site if so?
So just going to the mentally, people with mental health needs, we just passed a package of legislation in the council, which I think requires 4 new respite centers throughout the city. I'm looking at my chief of staff. Is it 4? Okay, she thinks so too. 4 sounds right. And so what happens in the budget is funding is allocated to an agency, and then the administration really has the control over how these funds are allocated. So they're allocating it to open these 4 new respite centers. One of the problems I think we have in our city is we have 2 agencies. We have the housing agencies, HPD, and we have the homeless agencies, DSS. And it's weird that they're different agencies, because the Department of Homeless Services, I feel as though their job should be to put themselves out of business. They should be working night and day to house people and to work in better conjunction with HPD to house people. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we do have the capital funding. We accelerated some of that capital funding for NYCHA and for affordable housing. But really importantly, we passed legislation and we funded programs like City FEPS, which is a housing voucher, which says you're facing eviction. Here's a voucher to help get you back on your feet. Because when people aren't housed, it causes an immense amount of instability in their lives, especially in the lives of their children. And guess what? It is more expensive to house someone in a shelter than it is in their own homes. The vouchers are cheaper than the shelter. So whether you pretend you don't care about people, you just care about money, you're doing the right fiscal decision with that city, with that city FEPS voucher.
And you shorten the time, right, that people would have to wait to get those vouchers?
Yeah, so it used to be 90 days you had to be in the shelter system before you qualified for a voucher. And so it just didn't make a ton of sense that you had to enter yourself into a shelter system, destabilize your entire life, destabilize perhaps the life of your family, wait 90 days, and then start that process of qualifying. We said, just stay in your home, stay in your home. Okay, we have it looks like we have a few more minutes before we hit our 8:30 mark, so
Okay,
I give you discretion to ask
why don't we move
the
on?
most controversial, whatever the most
Most
controversial.
controversial, I have a lot of questions about parks.
Oh, okay.
Actually, why don't we start with the cricket stadium and then talk about just generally, funding? Or we could just move on from that.
No. Let's talk cricket.
Okay, well, no one seems to think it's a great idea for there to be a temporary cricket stadium to be erected in Van Cortlandt Park. Can you talk a little bit about this issue?
Sure.
And the budgetary.
And it doesn't, oh boy. I'm still waiting. I am waiting for someone from the community to tell me that they want to see this thing. I'm waiting. And I'm someone who tries to give everyone a fair shake, listen to everyone, and, oh, we got one. Cover your face when you leave. They'll throw vegetables at you or some pumpkins. No, so the administration came to us with a proposal to build a temporary cricket stadium. Now, this is something that wouldn't be funded by, supposedly wouldn't be funded by the city, so it's not really impacting the budget in that regard. And the thing I kept repeating to them was, come to the community, come to the community, come to the community. They did so a little late. They had a meeting with the community board. Look, in reality, there are details that they're sharing that are a little different than what the community thinks. And in all fairness, if they'd only shared those earlier, maybe we can have a more nuanced, honest conversation. But they want to build this 34,000 person stadium, restricting access to our park from what they say is January to July. There are certainly legal hurdles with park alienation. But as it relates to the budget, they had an analysis, of course, from people they hired. This is the International Cricket Council. They hired a consultant to do an analysis. They said it would bring over $100 million, maybe $140-something million in economic activity into the city. And you look at a number like that, and you're a citywide official, and it's hard to say no to that. And I say two things. One is, was that an independent analysis, Ariel? And the second thing is, in their own analysis, they said these are 10 categories of economic activity, and these are the community boards that would benefit from them. Most, if not everyone here, I think lives in Community Board 8. Community Board 8, where Van Cortlandt Park is, by the way, was in one of those categories. Community Board 7, which is adjacent to it, and probably, based on demographics, has the highest cricket fandom in the district, had 0 of those community boards receiving, according to their analysis, economic activity. And so from that economic perspective, if this goes forward, which there are serious reasons and concerns in the community that are totally legitimate, serious legal concerns, but if this goes forward, there are really troubling things about their own economic analysis, which need to be gotten into. There are still basic questions about parking and transportation that haven't worked out. And the big one for me, I think, is, look, you didn't have lights on at the Van Cortlandt Park bathroom for over a month. We can't get crime down at Chandler Recreation Area. And I just met with a deputy commissioner for NYPD today, and we brought it up to her again, hopefully getting more resources there. And I said to her, I have this video of people dancing on the 16 bus. And she said, oh, well, maybe people dance on bus, we have to see the video. And I was like, no, dancing on top of the bus. And so there are serious issues worked out, but bringing it back to the budget, it is deeply problematic. There's legislative hurdles, but budget-wise, it could, if it happens, it could bring in money. Maybe, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe. We'll see.
And people are concerned about funding for parks, so
Yeah.
what say you, is the 1%?
So there's a coalition of us who say 1% for parks. 1% of the city budget should be for parks. Parks were our oasis during the pandemic when we were in lockdown. It should have been a no-brainer that we can put more money into parks. One of the problems with the parks budget isn't just how much money, but that these workers are seasonal, and every year the funding for our parks workers has to be renewed. And so you think you're in some cases the parks workers, hard to find them if you're not sure your job's going to be there next year. And that's why we work so hard with our community partners for funding our parks. We got, I think the biggest one was last year, over $5 million for Van Cortlandt Park, our local park. There's other funding we get for upgrades at different parks throughout the district, but that's sort of the big one. Again, the rest of them are online. I encourage you to search for that. And it's also important why we fund with our expense dollars. So I mentioned 105,000, I think, for Van Cortlandt Park, but there are other groups we fund, like Partnerships for Parks, Citizens Committee in New York, that fund some of those parks cleanups that we all love to go to, and that the community board I know loves to promote, and support some of the painting that goes on at the parks and throughout our communities. So no doubt we need 1% for parks. And again, through our discretionary funding, we do try to make up some of that and really try to get those investments in our park. But I will say the biggest one, again, I am so thrilled about the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook is becoming a reality. Thanks, Neil. That's your neighborhood, yeah.
Okay, do we have time for any more questions? No, we don't. I am going to give the rest of these questions to your office, and then hopefully we can work on getting them answers later.
Yes, and I'll be around a little bit after this, but I really just want to thank you all for coming. Thank you everyone on Bronxnet who's watching, and thank you to the Riverdale Y for hosting this event and allowing us the space to share this information with you. Thank you.
Thank you.